This movie came out about 6 years ago, and I was very well aware of the documentary, The People versus George Lucas, and I believe I saw like the first 10 minutes of it, and it was when they were, I mean, it starts right off pretty much with the fans singing that stupid George Lucas fingered my childhood song, and I kept from watching it for so long because it really felt at the time like it was really bashing George Lucas. And let me explain something. I've done a ton of videos on this, Star Wars in particular, but I think I've praised the man enough. George Lucas is by far my favorite filmmaker. For a number of reasons, he's like my hero as far as like filmmaking is concerned. I mean, if there's anybody in the world I would like to meet, it'd be him. Just to have a discussion about his films, and I'm also kind of curious a little bit about his personal life, which, George Lucas still is a very private kind of person. There's not a lot out there about, his personal struggles. I mean, aside from the fact that, he had gone through kind of a nasty divorce in the 80s, right between Jedi and I think Temple of Doom around that era, which is why, like, The Empire Strikes Back and The Temple of Doom are both very dark films. But that aside, he's done so much for filmmaking aside from just Star Wars. If it wasn't for him, I mean, special effects, digital effects wouldn't be where it is today, digital editing, nonlinear editing, and the fact that I think most major studios actually shoot digitally now. I don't know if there's a lot of people shooting on film left. I know they still do it. I know, like The Force Awakens, and there are a lot of films that are still shot on film. But in terms of overall distribution, I don't even think they project film anymore. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure the majority of films across America are shown digitally, regardless of what medium they're shot on. That's all in no small part to George Lucas's efforts to really change the face of filmmaking. And a filmmaker is also, they're a storyteller, but they also, they're not just a director. They craft the ideal world. They just, George Lucas has contributed so much to filmmaking, and I really feel that the fans who tear him apart because he made alterations to the Star Wars trilogy and they didn't like, the prequels, which to this day I defend. I just didn't want to see a documentary that just bashed him the whole time, and that's what kind of turned me off to it. I finally sat down and watched it last night. There've been a couple of people in recent months that have kind of recommended it as a documentary to watch, and as someone who's a fan of George Lucas, I really wanted to watch it, and here are my initial thoughts on it. It's a little jarring in terms of it doesn't really know. It knows what it wants to say, but the way it presents the material, it presents both sides, which I really liked. It presents, the fans who are angry with him, and it, presents the fans who more or less defend him and say that the fans who talk trash about him are kind of ridiculous. So it does that very well. The organization is what's a little jarring because it goes back and forth. It doesn't really cover a specific era of Star Wars. It is basically mostly about Star Wars, by the way. It touches on like American Graffiti and THX and Indiana Jones, but like 90% of it is dominated by Star Wars and the influence it has. And it makes some good points. I did notice that a lot of the behind the scenes footage they used weren't very good quality. So obviously there was like a rights issue there. It has a very independent feel to it, a very unofficial feel to it. I believe you can find the movie on DVD, but like I said, it's not like endorsed by Lucasfilm or anything like that. Lucasfilm would never release something like this. The whole thing of them, like, the whole George Lucas fingered my childhood and raped my childhood and things like that. They're basically just trying to make a point and trying to show you both sides of the argument. And it's kind of hard for me to talk about the quality of the film without talking about my opinions. And I've made it very clear over the years that I love George Lucas and I really enjoyed the prequels. And I would enjoy them more if it wasn't for the barrage of reviews and and critics and things that have, even to this day, when The Force Awakens came out, even leading up to that release, everybody, it seemed like, was revisiting the prequels, and they were either making excuses for them, trying to reverse their opinions of the films, going like, oh, I guess they're not as bad as I thought. And then there were people that for years have hated the prequels and have just kind of reinforced their hatred for them. And I get it. If they didn't care that much, then they wouldn't. It is really funny that Star Wars is really probably the only film where if you hate the films, you still love to hate them. It's kind of weird. Now, me personally, I understand that like the prequels are not flawless. They definitely have flaws. Over the years, things that didn't really bother me so much when The Phantom Menace came out bother me today. Like I used to, defend Jar Jar Binks, and he's kind of a terrible character. He's really annoying. And me personally, what I didn't like about him the most, aside from the fact, that his voice was really annoying, was that he doesn't really change. There's no real character development with him to verify, to verify him being a character. Versus like, you can say someone like Chewbacca doesn't have character development either, but, he's cool. He's Chewbacca, he's Han Solo's second in command, and I understand why, like, Chewbacca is loved and Jar Jar is not. I'm not making that argument. But for a character, most of these characters, I think there should be some kind of character change. And usually there is. I would say just about every character in the whole saga starts somewhere and ends somewhere very different. But for Jar Jar, you can make the argument that really, the Phantom Menace especially, they pay more attention to the digital effects, and the story and everything kind of goes in the background, which contradicts what Lucas has said for years, that special effects are just tools to tell a story. The only reason you have special effects is to tell the story in some fashion on film. And sometimes you have to invent new technology, like he did with the original trilogy, to get those ideas across. But it does kind of seem like the special effects took precedence over the storytelling in The Phantom Menace. Now, you'll never get me to say that Episode 1 is a bad film. I'll never say that. It is flawed. The story is even a little disjointed, I will admit that, but I have a good time watching it. It is definitely probably my least favorite of the original 6 films. I actually like it better than Rogue One, though, because Rogue One was a great looking film, and it had great action sequences, especially that third act. I loved seeing Darth Vader in that film. His scenes were awesome, but I would like Disney to do a Star Wars film and not rely on Darth Vader. Star Wars has always been about the characters, and at least in like The Phantom Menace, you had Obi-Wan Kenobi, you had Anakin, you had Senator Palpatine. You had characters that you knew were establishing the groundwork and that were going to change throughout the course of these films. So whether you liked The Phantom Menace or not, you can't really argue that those characters are very important and have carried over in some form in all of the movies. Whereas Rogue One, the characters to me were kind of like one-note characters, and when they, spoiler alert, they all die at the end. When they do, I don't really feel a whole lot for them. The character that I felt for the most was K2SO, the friggin' robot in that movie. So, I mean, I can go on and on. I can go on for hours about my love for these movies. This is going to probably be a really short review. But I did like that it wasn't just crapping on Lucas the whole way. It did show both sides of the argument, and it ends on a real positive note. That the only reason why they gave him so much crap was because they cared so much for those movies. They also did get into the Lucas's his resilience, if you will, if that's the right word, to release the original unaltered trilogy to Blu-ray in a format that we all want. I can understand the argument, but watching the trilogy recently on Blu-ray, the official releases, aside from some of the special effects that they fixed up, and I know he's gone back and changed things time and time again, they're 90% the same movies that we saw growing up. I don't want to get into the whole Han and Greedo thing, because to me it's pointless. I don't think that half a second laser blast changes Han's arc, because I guess the argument there is if Greedo was at point blank range, he should have been able to shoot Han. So if that's the version of the movie you want, fine, let him kill Han Solo and then the movie just ends right there and we won't have an entire saga to enjoy. So there you go. Thanks for ruining Star Wars, all you friggin' fanboys. But The People versus George Lucas, I mean, it's hard to say I recommend it, only because it's an interesting documentary, but there's so much things out there. It's basically fan opinion on whether you like George Lucas or dislike George Lucas based on the changes he made. And there's already a ton of like reviews and videos out there covering the subject. And it really does kind of seem like they took a bunch of YouTube videos and kind of put them all together, because the quality of these interviews aren't the greatest. One of the things that I learned how to do really well when I went to get my bachelor's in media communication, I shot a lot of interviews. And the way they shot a lot of these interviews, they shoot a lot of like profile shots of the people talking. It was really weird. Like the way that I'm shooting myself right now, this is traditionally how you would shoot an interview. I mean, this isn't the ideal background to shoot one, but they would like shoot like profiles of people talking, where usually it was like a close-up of someone's mouth. It was really weird how they shot a lot of these things. And I understand like whoever made this was like a maverick independent filmmaker. I appreciate that. So that to me kind of stood out. It was an interesting way of doing it, and very creative, but it went against the grain. It threw me off a little bit. And there's a lot of the interviews in this that are shot like that. And then because I'm pretty sure they couldn't get clearance to interview George Lucas himself, all the interviews from George Lucas were taken from archival like VHS footage, where he's talking about the special editions and things like that. So I thought it was kind of a hodgepodge way of stitching all these things together. If you're interested, I would say give it a watch. I'm sure you can download it on like Amazon or rent it or buy it on DVD. But like I said, there's already a ton of like videos and things out there covering it. So those are just my thoughts. I thought it was okay, but again, it's not gonna like change my opinion. I kind of get the issue here, but and I understand when you love somebody and have an affinity for someone's work. It's easy to miss the fact that everybody, even Michael Jackson, the guy who did Thriller, his later work really lacked in quality. It's Michael friggin' Jackson I'm talking about. So every filmmaker has their missteps. From Spielberg to Lucas to Christopher Nolan, everybody has a film that isn't great, that doesn't work. And I get that, and for that, that might have been the prequels for Lucas. But I love the man's filmmaking, I love his work, and that's just my opinion. I know there are flaws, but the film didn't really do it for me. Again, it was an interesting look at what the fans feel, but I would have liked to see a documentary that focused more on Lucas himself and not so much fan opinion. So there you go. Thanks for watching, and I promise later in the week I should have another horror review up. So thank you once again.